different individuals or different organizations to have a direct say in how countries behave with regards to their populations. This is a very complex thing. So, in your view, we should have the audit first rather
Yeah,
than. Mhm. How
we
long would
should
that take, though?
we should have the audit, and we should, in fact, I would call for, instead of a treaty, I would call for an amnesty. One of the reasons I feel the WHO is on the aggressive and the world governments are on the aggressive are because if it comes out that most of the measures, draconian measures, did not help, it caused harm, they accountability would be unimaginable. So that may be causing them to attack again with a pandemic treaty, to impose censorship and to declare another pandemic of disease X. I mean, this is something which one can never imagine, how you can have a pandemic of disease X and start preparing for it. So this, I think, is a defensive reflex to avoid the accountability of the omissions and commissions of the pandemic measures. So if we go for an amnesty and let us say, okay, what has happened is okay, we should not repeat the same mistakes. That would be a better way to go forward. And amnesty, we can have the science and we can have the evidence and what to do in the next pandemic and what not to do in the next pandemic. Here we are going with a higher dose of the same medicine, which includes surveillance, which includes vaccine, which includes suspension of individual rights. Censorship itself is a major violation. So we should go for an amnesty.
That's a very, very interesting point, Amitav. Is that at the moment, I can imagine that politicians and public health leaders are very worried, and they will not want to be brought to account. And the only way sometimes to overcome that, where you can actually get back to science, is to say, we acknowledge your mistake, but we will not hold you accountable whilst we do the audit to make sure that it is done thoroughly. Do you think the public would ever accept that kind of thinking, Amitav?
Uh, well, it has to accept, otherwise, the alternative is worse. And I think I come from the land of Gandhi. So Gandhi always forgave, and so did Jesus Christ. So I think we can move ahead. Otherwise, things, they, even Sun Tzu said that when you corner an enemy, you should leave an exit. Otherwise, like a cat cornered, it can fight very ferociously. So I think if that is the only way forward. I mean,
Wow, that is very profound, Amitav. So listen, I want you to give me a summary conclusion as to where we are now and what would be your recommendations as the people are listening and they want to understand what should they be doing, because it feels as though this is purely political and doesn't actually impact the public in terms of the decision making. What should people do in the context of this kind of decision?
people should be at the front because people are the one who are actually going to be affected. In this pandemic, also, they got affected more by the countermeasures to control the pandemic than by the pandemic itself. So people should be in the front, and I have a feeling that people are coming to the front because when Andrew Bridgen was also making his speech in the UK Parliament, I could hear the sound of the people from the gallery. I think it was full, but MPs were not there. So they must be on the defensive. So people should ask every question. Like you mentioned about global warming, you mentioned about, I mean, there are concerns about carbon emission. So people should ask for the evidence base. What is the evidence base? Because global warming is also maybe genuine, but it is also becoming something like group thing. All academicians are talking of global, and they may be getting grants to work on global warming, and most of them are again modeling exercises, like which went off the track in the pandemic also. So people should question their elected representatives in a democracy, and that is the only way to be always on guard, because governments and politicians have their own interest, and sometimes they are compelled to follow a particular narrative. I mean, they are not as powerful as they may appear to be nowadays in a world which has become so much of pharma interest and corporate interest, and other even scientists also cannot be trusted to be independent because of their career prospects. Because if we saw in the pandemic, many scientists they lost their appointments, they lost their, some of them threatened with loss of license. So people cannot work with this, as the Mr. Solomon was saying, that advocate that WHO workers require immunity. Similarly, scientists also require immunity from such victimization. So we are talking of only WHO scientists who require immunity for a treaty which they will get immunity and all that. What about the scientists who did not get immunity during the pandemic? So you are giving a message to people at middle level and junior level scientists who are in the career for survival. You are getting